the idea that the group is what matters. And of course, the ultimate attack on reason. Individuals don't matter. Individuals don't think. Truth is revealed. It's revealed to somehow to this collective consciousness, which is the proletarian, or the collective consciousness that is the Aryan race. Now, since there isn't a collective consciousness, we know that, but don't tell anybody, right? We need a leader to be able to, a philosopher king, to be able to commune with this collective consciousness and tell us what it thinks. And that's how you get authoritarianism. But authoritarians always say, I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it for you. I'm just discovering the truth and communicating to you. And it turns out that we have to sacrifice a huge number of people in the world in order to satisfy the will of the proletarian or the will of the Aryan race. 20 million, 100 million, 200 million. The sky's the limit when it comes to sacrificing individuals. But that is the rejection of the Enlightenment. Communism and Nazism are the rejection of the ideas of individualism and of reason. They are the rejection of the ideas of Western civilization. They are not bad parts of Western civilization. They are the enemy of Western civilization. Nazism and communism are not part of. They're the rejection of. As is the whole string of German philosophers that I mentioned, of which communism and Nazism, in my view, is the logical outcome, the necessary outcome. Collectivism always leads to destruction and death. Now, we survived the Nazis, we survived the fascists, and ultimately we survived the communists. But we're badly wounded. We've lost, well, we know what we reject. We reject this particular form of collectivism. And we reject murder and slaughter for the most part. What are we for? Nobody in the West today knows. We live a life, for the most part, based on reason and individualism. We love technology. We love science still. We have respect for technology and science. We try to be happy. If you go to any bookstore, I assume in France it's the same. You have aisles of self-help book. We all want to be better. We all want to achieve happiness somehow. But we can't name it. And indeed, remnants of the anti-Enlightenment mentality, both from German philosophy but also from Christianity, are still strongly embedded in this culture. It's still true that we hold as moral, not the pursuit of happiness, not the pursuit of individual fulfillment, flourishing, Aristotelian eudaimonia, or Ayn Rand, egoism. What we value still morally, what we say we value, we might not live this way, is altruism, sacrifice, giving up for other people. Other people are more important than myself. And altruism, I don't mean altruism as being nice to people and opening a door and being polite. Egoists do that. I'm talking about altruism as viewing the purpose of your life to serve others. Mother Teresa, that's my image. She hated her life. She did it out of duty. She did it because she believed it was moral and just. That sense, which we all have deep inside, if we grew up in this world, that was brought to us, I think, primarily by Christianity, but also by a great another French philosopher, Augustin Comte, who encourages us to eliminate self for the sake of others. These ideas are deep inside of us, and we struggle with the ideas of the Enlightenment and these anti-Enlightenment ideas, these ideas that undercut Enlightenment thinking. Now, in my view, Ayn Rand gives us the tools to finish the Enlightenment project. I think the Enlightenment was weakened. You could argue failed, but I don't think it failed because we still live in an enlightened world, even if it's in decline. Ayn Rand gives us the tools to fully understand and justify reason. So I think that Locke and the rest of the French Enlightenment and the Scottish Enlightenment, while incredible people and it created enormous value, they didn't get to the heart, philosophical heart of reason. They couldn't completely articulate the case for reason. They didn't have a solid theory of concept and concept formation and how we understand the world and how we abstract and what it means to abstract and how we induce. And they didn't have a complete theory of inducing knowledge from reality. Ayn Rand does. At least she has the beginnings of one. She called it Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, because she still realized there was still a lot of work to do, but at least she gives us the tools to develop epistemology fully for full, complete defense of reason, which is what I think is the most important thing that needs to happen today, as the attack on reason is again intensifying in the West. She gives us an understanding of individualism that never existed. Again, because I think even the Enlightenment figures, particularly the Scottish Enlightenment, the French less so, were so imbued with Christianity that they couldn't give up on Christian morality. They couldn't give up on sacrifice as an ideal. They couldn't give up the idea that sacrifice was noble, that living for others was good, that the meek shall inherit the earth. They couldn't quite, even the founding fathers, couldn't quite give all that up. You know, Thomas Jefferson took the Bible, the New Testament, and cut it up, and he threw away all the parts he didn't like, which is all the mysticism he didn't like. So he was a man of reason. But he kept the Sermon on the Mount, because he viewed that as a moral philosophy. That is a really, really bad moral philosophy, if you take it seriously. And it's a moral philosophy that imbues the West today. And it's a moral philosophy that needs to be rejected. And there is no moral thinker that presents an alternative to the Sermon on the Mount other than Ayn Rand. I mean, Aristotle and then Ayn Rand. Spinoza maybe a little bit in between. But there is no alternative in the world today other than Rand's to the idea of sacrifice. Ayn Rand presents a moral theory. Not just a little bit here and there, but a moral theory for living life. A moral theory for living life for oneself. Because who else should you live it for? It doesn't mean you treat other people like garbage. Other people are of huge value to you. But it means that your standard by which you make decisions is your own life. Is your own flourishing. Is your own value. It means that each one of us as individuals needs to strive to be the best that we can be as individuals, as human beings. As complete human beings, as reasoning animals, as rational animals. This small code, I think, is, since I don't really understand epistemology that much, this to me is what the heart of what Ayn Rand's ideas are. This to me is why I fell in love with Ayn Rand. I fell in love with Ayn Rand because for the first time somebody said to me, it's okay to live for you, for yourself. It's okay to aspire, to be happy. It's okay to live a complete and fulfilling life. The moral ideal is not Christ on a cross dying a painful, excruciating death for sins he did not commit, for sins other people committed. I can't think of anything more unjust than putting Jesus on the cross. No, life is to be enjoyed. Life is to be embraced. Life is to be lived fully. That's Ayn Rand's morality, in a superficial, quick way. Right? I encourage you all to read The Virtue of Selfishness. Her book, is it in French? Mm-hmm. Which is in French. Because I think that's a revelation. Now, all of the morality is in Atlas Shrugged. Because for Ayn Rand, the moral ideal is not Christ on a cross. It's John Galt. It's the man who felt no guilt. No unearned guilt. No original sin. The man who lives for himself asks no other man to live for him, but will not live for anybody else, but for himself, for the fulfillment of his own values at nobody's expense, but as a trader in win-win relationships with other human beings, with other people. So these, to me, are the foundational ideas. These two ideas of reason and individualism are the foundational ideas of Ayn Rand's philosophy. I believe she completes the Enlightenment project, or at least adds significantly to it, for us maybe, to fully complete, to the extent that there's still philosophical work to fill in the defense of reason and defense of individualism. But Ayn Rand takes us a long way. Ayn Rand is primarily a philosopher, primarily has something to say about reason and individualism or egoism, capitalism as a political and economic system. I think are outcomes of that. If you are an individualist, that is, you care about your own life, and you're capable of knowing the world through your reason, you don't need mother government sitting on your shoulder telling you how much to pay your employees or how much to take as an employee, what soda you're allowed to drink and what food you're not allowed to drink, what drugs you're allowed to consume and what drugs you're not. And I'm talking about the healthy ones, but anyway, you know, it's none of anybody's business. Right? And if you are a real individualist, if you're an egoist, you don't want anybody telling you what to do. You want to discover truth by yourself. You want to go out there and try and experiment and learn and fail and succeed and learn from your failures and move in life. You don't need government regulations and controls, and you certainly don't want government taking 50% of your money, which represents 50% of your time, which represents 50% of your life. It's yours because you're an egoist and you care about what your stuff is. Put aside all the economic theory and all that. At the end of the day, that's not what's important. I mean, it's all consistent, right? But at the end of the day, it's not about maximizing some utility function or maximizing the GDP of France. Who cares? It's about maximizing my freedom to live as I see fit so that I can pursue the values necessary for my life, for my happiness. And yeah, it turns out that GDP is maximized when you do that. But that's not a starting point, and it's not, this is the big difference objectivists have with libertarians. We don't start with economics. We end with economics. We end with politics. We don't start there. We start with reason and individualism. We start with the foundation, the philosophical foundations, I believe, of liberty. I believe of the enlightenment of any successful society. So France needs Ayn Rand because the whole of Western civilization needs Ayn Rand because we're in decline. These ideas are under attack. Ayn Rand has the best answers out there for the attack. She is the best defense of Western civilization that exists in the world today. The rise of collectivism, the rise of tribalism, the rise of emotionalism can only be dealt with through philosophy, through a philosophical attack on them. And Ayn Rand gives us the best tools to do that. But more than that, and I'll just end with this note, the most important thing, in my view, about Ayn Rand's philosophy is not what it done for France. It's not what it does for Western civilization. It's not what it does for any country or place or anything like that. It's what it can do for you as an individual and what it can do for them as individuals out there. At the end of the day, a life of unreason, a life filled with unearned guilt, a life filled with collectivistic ideas that you don't actually live, or some people do live, but that are constantly tugging at you, is an unhappy, miserable, pathetic life. It's a life filled with angst, with anxiety. Ayn Rand is the ultimate self-help. Ayn Rand is the ultimate philosophy for living a life free of unearned guilt, a life that makes it possible to flourish and to be truly happy, to truly achieve happiness in life. So at the end of the day, it's the individuals who need Ayn Rand more than it is any civilization or any country or anything like that, because Ayn Rand is primarily a philosopher of and for the individual. Thank you. questions.
Have you? First of all, sorry for my English and for my accent.
It's fine.
Sorry for everyone.
The accent is kind of cute.
Thank you. Have you read the biography by Alain Laurent of Ayn Rand? And if no, I explain why.
I have not. I have not.
I asked the question because if you are French, there is not a lot of book translated in French about Ayn Rand.
Sure.
And you have some of her novels, and maybe the only one book about Ayn Rand is Alain Laurent's book. And in the last 2 chapters, and Alain Laurent will correct me if I say something wrong, what you learn about Ayn Rand, that she's not a real philosopher, that she have never read Kant or Nietzsche or Plato, and that the influence of Aristotle is maybe a fraud, and all stuff like that, and about her personality, that she's like almost hysterical or sort of stuff like that. And this is the image, the only image you can have in French when you read. So I agree with all these statements that Alain Laurent wrote in his book.
So I'm respectfully going to disagree. Certainly she read Kant, certainly she read all of those philosophers. I don't think there's any evidence she didn't read them. And there is evidence she did. Evidence of people who knew her personally and who knew philosophy because they studied it, they got PhDs in philosophy, and who had conversations with her directly. So I disagree with that. I disagree with the idea of I don't understand, I guess, the idea of Aristotle's influence as a fraud. She had a temperament. She was a passionate person. I think most geniuses are. I don't think she was. I don't make a big deal out of that. I don't think it's that significant. She had a temper. Yeah, when she saw an injustice, she saw something wrong. She had a temper. She certainly didn't like certain people, and she let you know when she didn't like them. But I don't know. I mean, I have not seen anybody say Ayn Rand's wrong about Kant. Here's the reference. What she said about Kant, and again verified by philosophers who studied with her and studied philosophy as well. I think is legitimate. I also don't buy this notion, and I know a lot of the biographies, even in English, present this, of her being miserable and depressed and so on. Again, based on people who knew her, I just don't think that's true. Again, was she angry? Sure. Was she depressed when Atlas Shrugged didn't succeed the way she thought it would succeed? People didn't respond to it the way she thought? Yeah. But she got back on her feet and started writing nonfiction, right? And she spent all the 60s and 70s writing and working. And to the day she died, she was working. On the week that she died, she was still writing. She was writing a television adaptation of Atlas Shrugged. From what I know, she was a happy person. She was a difficult person. She was a principled person. She was a passionate person. But she was not a miserable or depressed or nasty person, as so many of other people's biographies, again, I haven't read Alain, so I can't comment, but other people's biographies have presented her as. And I'm hoping there'll be a definitive biography coming out, which will document what courses she took in college, what books she read. I mean, part of the thing is you can go to her library. We have the library in the Ayn Rand archives. And you can see the books she read, and you can see her annotations on the books.
Yes, but most French speak
I know.
only French, and they are the only book. I suggest.
And even in English, these views are.
The 2 last chapters, because it's very interesting, the image that we can have in France. And also the fact that Alain Laurent just said that we have the virtue of selfishness in French. It's important to precise that it's just some chapter, just 7 chapters on the 19th chapter.
Yep. Does it have the main essay, the objectivist ethics?
Yes.
Good. Well, that's the most important one. Did you want to comment?
Bien. J'ai jamais employé le mot hystérique.
Je n'ai pas dit que vous l'aviez employé.
Ah bon, oui, mais c'est ce qu'on aurait pu comprendre. Deuxièmement, vous sélectionnez des passages où, en effet, je rapporte ce qui seront même parfois dans des milieux randiens, en oubliant le reste. Mais là, je reviens à ce que je disais tout à l'heure. Ça ne sert, je crois, rigoureusement à rien de transformer Ayn Rand en une sorte de sainte. Elle est humaine, très humaine. Et sur le plan purement philosophique, je maintiens ce que j'ai dit. Dans une démarche philosophique, on cite ses sources. On cite les passages dont on parle. Et on les réfute. Ce qu'elle n'a jamais dit. Pour une raison bien simple d'ailleurs, c'est que malheureusement, Ayn Rand n'a jamais publié, si on accepte le long discours de John Galt, elle a toujours dit qu'elle allait le faire, mais elle ne l'a jamais fait, un ouvrage où elle aurait développé longuement, patiemment, rigoureusement ses idées. Ce qu'elle a publié, hors ses romans, ce sont des articles, des interviews, des entretiens, etc., qui ont au maximum une quinzaine de pages. Alors, en effet, ça explique que là, elle ne peut pas, en effet, prendre appui sur des références. Mais je maintiens formellement que quelqu'un qui veut mériter le titre de philosophe doit argumenter en citant intégralement ses sources, en les réfutant, etc. C'est ça qui est ennuyeux. D'ailleurs, il y a de nombreuses sources qui indiquent également aux États-Unis que, en effet, souvent, elle, sans doute pas sur Aristote, parce qu'elle l'avait lu dans sa jeunesse étudiante, mais pour les autres, visiblement, elle ne les a jamais lus. C'est de seconde main. Et ça, c'est tout de même fâcheux. Et moi, je n'ai pas voulu, en tant qu'intellectuel, avaliser une image tout à fait fantastique d'Ayn Rand qui, en effet, aurait totalement maîtrisé les gens dont elle parle. En particulier sur Kant, il y aurait beaucoup à dire là-dessus. Encore que souvent, elle a parfois plus raison qu'elle ne le croit, mais comme ce serait mieux si, en effet, c'était longuement argumenté, charpenté, avec des références. Ça, c'est valable pour Kant, c'est valable aussi pour quelques autres. Et je ne crois pas du tout, là je suis en désaccord total avec vous, mais je ne crois pas du tout que ça donne une image fausse et mauvaise d'Ayn Rand, la preuve.
I would just encourage you to make your own judgment. At the end of the day, you have to judge for yourself, and I encourage you to the extent you can read in English, but what's available in French is great. And then read the rest in English, because there's a lot to read. And there's a new book that came out called The Companions Ayn Rand's Ideas. It just came out about a year ago by a number of scholars. Well, that's 100 voices, but the real... This is good for her personality and for her life. It's 100 different interviews with 100 different people who knew her. But I think for the philosophy, The Companions Ayn Rand is written by philosophers, each one writing an essay from a different perspective on her philosophy and explaining it, but also analyzing it. So I think it's the most valuable book out there written by about her available today. I also recommend Leonard Peikoff's philosophy, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, which I think is the definitive philosophical statement of her ideas, integrated into one book. And it might be out there, but there it is. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for your speech. In the light of what you said about the embedded Christianity in all of us and the attacks on reason, it made me think about my becoming a libertarian. Two things come to mind after what you said. It's when I discovered Pyrrhonism. It's like discrediting pseudomedicines and things like that, and arguing about the reason in medicine and in medical things. So that was one of the first things in my life that defined reason for me. And the second thing was when I became an atheist. I was a hardcore, passionate believer. I wanted to be a priest at one point, and then I flipped totally, and I became a hardcore atheist because I read something that. These two transformations, I think, paved the way to my becoming a libertarian. That came a few years after, and when I recalled these moments, it was incredible because my brain was actually, I felt my brain really working without anchor. It was like lighter and free and happy, and that's I think that's why it paved the way to my becoming.
Yeah, that's a great story, and I think you've identified something important, really, really important. Now, there'll be a lot of people who tell you, a lot of libertarians are Christians, or Jews, or Muslims, or whatever. So, and I get into trouble all over the world. Because a lot of the lead thinkers today in the libertarian world are Christians. But I'm not a libertarian in that sense. I'm an objectivist. And, I share certain political principles with libertarians, but I don't believe in a big tent. And I think we are doomed to lose the case for freedom if we anchor it in religion. Religion is mysticism, religion is Christian ethics, and the Christian ethics and mysticism are incompatible with freedom. Never mind libertarianism, they're incompatible with freedom. This is why when any civilization at any point in human history that has taken religion seriously and given religious authorities political power has always been authoritarian. Whether it's Old Testament Jews, or whether it's the communities of Hasidic Jews, which are basically authoritarian in their little communes, or whether it's post-Roman Empire or during Roman Empire Christianity, once it became political, whether it's the Catholic Church, to some extent to this day, or whether it's Calvin and Calvin's Geneva. They were dictatorships, and they have to be dictatorships. There is no other way to handle it. So now again, I get into trouble with this. So my religious libertarian friends will come and talk to you, I'm sure. But I think those two are incompatible. And I at Mont Pelerin, I don't know if you're familiar with Mont Pelerin Society, at the last big meeting of the Mont Pelerin Society, Classical Liberal Society, they had a debate between me and a Catholic. The moderator was a Catholic priest, so it was 2 against 1. About whether religion is compatible with freedom or not, and I strongly took the stand that it's not. And in that sense, I think Europe has an advantage over America, because I think America has religion is way too embedded. Not that Americans take the religion really seriously, but the more seriously they take it, the more we move away from freedom. The rise of evangelical Christianity has brought about the destruction of the Republican Party and the move away from freedom. And it's no accident the evangelicals, and I don't know what Ellen said about Donald Trump, but I view Donald Trump as a big step backwards, away from freedom. And it's no accident the evangelicals supported Trump. They support the element of authoritarianism in Trump.
Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, your reader, or?
Well, the problem with Christopher Hitchens and Dawkins, as much as I respect their views on atheism, is that they are Christians when it comes to morality. So they have internalized Christian morality and adopted it and secularized it and accepted it. And as a consequence of accepting that morality, they have accepted socialism, basically. So they've accepted statism. But it's not that they start with statism. They start with morality. They start with the idea that the individual doesn't matter. And Dawkins even has a genetic theory about why the collective matters and altruism is genetically coded and all this nonsense. So he starts with the morality and then derives his socialism from that. And unfortunately, Sam Harris is tinged with the same thing, although I think Sam Harris is better than Dawkins and Hitchens. Although, you got to love Hitchens sometimes when he goes after certain groups. He can be incredibly articulate and amazing. And Hitchens, I respect this about Hitchens. Hitchens is one of the few contemporary intellectuals who realized that Ayn Rand was the enemy and spent significant amounts of time in his talks attacking her. And I respect that. Most of them just ignore her. So,
yeah.
You had a question? Yeah.
Yes. You mentioned the case of Scandinavia. I have a friend, a socialist friend, who is very passionate and stubborn about it. I've been trying to convince him that it wasn't really socialism, that it wasn't that effective, but it's not working. So what do you think I should tell him?
Well, I'm not sure you can tell him anything that'll work. But I do have at least one video and maybe a couple of podcasts just on Scandinavia. So there's a lot of content of it. But just a quick outline. Scandinavia, Sweden in particular, from 1870 until 1955-60, was the most capitalist country in Europe, and maybe in the world. And certainly, and as a consequence, went from being the poorest country in Europe in 1870 to the richest country in Europe in the early years after World War II. Partially, it was the richest because World War II destroyed the rest of Europe, and Sweden remained relatively unscathed. But also, before World War II, it was a very rich country. Many of the biggest industries in Europe were based in Sweden as a consequence of the freedom that was allowed. In 1960, they decided to go to socialism. They took all that wealth that they had built up over 90 years or so and started redistributing it. And they redistributed and redistributed. It became poorer and poorer and poorer. Until in 1979, what was the largest income-producing industry in Sweden? ABBA. ABBA, the rock group. Number 2, Johan Borg, the tennis player. So industry was gone. Big business was gone out of Sweden because it was too regulated, it was too taxes, too much. And then by 1994, Sweden was Greece of today. Sweden was bankrupt. Sweden couldn't pay their debts. And since 1994, the government of Sweden has been reducing government spending, reducing redistribution of wealth, and dramatically reducing regulation. So indeed, Sweden today is less regulated business-wise than America is, than the United States of America is. And so Sweden today is not more socialist in any significant way than the United States of America is. It's just got a different set of mixed economy. All economies in the West are mixed. Some with more statism and less freedom, some with more freedom and less statism, but they're all mixed. And most of them are mixed about the same place, right? We all, tend to spend on a total about between 40 to 60% of GDP. We're right in the middle. The United States is closer to 40. If you add up federal, state, and local governments, it's close to 40. Sweden is like close to 50. I don't know where France is. I think it's closer to 60. France, yeah. So they're all between 40 and 60, right? So I mean, they're all statist. They're all government run, basically. Gone are the days where the federal government in the United States in the 19th century spent 3.5% of GDP. Today, the federal government spends 20%. 3.5. You could cut government spending at the federal level by 80% and get back to the wonderful, in my view, economy of the 19th century. So, I mean, that's just the beginning. But you could go on in detail about the fact that Swedes always happy. When you survey Swedes, they're happy. Right? In all happiness studies, Swedes are very happy. Because when you go to Sweden and you ask Swedes, are you happy? You're supposed to say yes. I'm Jewish in origin, right? When you ask a Jew if you're happy, nobody says yes. It's like it goes against everything you believe in to say yes. You're happy? How can you be happy? Look at all the problems in life and everything. So these studies are silly. And by the way, Swedes in America are just as happy as Swedes in Sweden. Swedes in America live longer or just as long as Swedes in Sweden. Swedes in America live in bigger houses, drive bigger cars, have more wealth than Swedes in Sweden. So when you control for variables, suddenly you discover that all the Sweden is good effects go away. They go away. Now there's a selection bias, you could argue, because the best Swedes went to America. Yes.
Nowadays, what's the status of the works of Nathaniel Branden and the Ayn Rand Institute? Are his works promoted or ignored or criticized? I'm asking this question because I'm a big fan of Ayn Rand, and at the same time, I like his works. I've read his autobiography, The Psychology of Self-Esteem, The Psychology of Romantic Love, which I found really interesting. I know that he was very criticized when he broke up with Ayn Rand by Ayn Rand's friends. So what do you think about him?
So he is cited and his works are promoted from the period where he worked with Ayn Rand. So from The Psychology of Self-Esteem, which she helped him, she edited it, but was published after they split, but she was involved in writing it, all through all the books of essays, Virtue of Selfishness, Capitalism, all have essays by Nathaniel Branden, and included in it, and she wanted them to stay in the books and to continue to be promoted, the existing work. We do not promote the work that he did after, for a couple of reasons. One is, I don't want to get into a big debate about this, but I consider him a bad guy. He might have been a good psychologist, but I consider him a bad human being. I think he did significant damage to the objectivist movement. I think he led the objectivist movement, unfortunately under Ayn Rand's guidance, in a negative direction. He was dogmatic. He was a nasty person. He treated people. I mean, he writes about psychology, but it's weird how people who write about psychology tend to be angry, nasty people. But he was a nasty person. He treated people on a one-on-one basis in a horrible way. So we don't promote him after that because we don't want to promote a guy who we consider a bad person. I do think his works written right after the split with Ayn Rand, particularly the Psychology of Romantic Love, I think are good. So there's good work. I think the more further away from Ayn Rand he got, the worse he got. And he started dabbling in mysticism and in men's rights and all kinds of weird things. Later on in life, he did seances, all kinds of strange stuff. So that is later in life, I think in the late 70s and going into the 80s. So I'd say the early work is best work and is good. And I'm sure that in the future, objectivist psychologists who study Ayn Rand, will also study his work and refer to it. I'm not a psychologist. I'm an economist. I'm a finance guy.
Is there any other famous Randian psychologist?
Unfortunately, no. Although I think that she and Nathaniel Branden had a significant influence on psychology. The whole rise today of the cognitive psychology movement, and even elements within the positive thinking movement. Although I think some of that's primacy of consciousness. But the whole idea of cognitive psychology, the idea that emotions are derived from ideas and what we think and the conclusions we come to, all of that comes from the work of Ayn Rand and comes from the work of Nathaniel Branden. So I think she's had a profound impact on the field of psychology, even though I can't say that this particular psychologist read Ayn Rand and what the links are. But you can see that the whole discussion of self-esteem really starts, with Ayn Rand, and Ayn Rand makes it a cardinal value, right? It's one of the three cardinal values, self-esteem. And self-esteem was not a psychological term until really the 1960s, until Nathaniel Branden, Ayn Rand, and then Nathaniel Branden bring it in. And then it gets distorted, and today it's nonsense. But at least the discussion of the concept was Ayn Rand. I'll say this just generally. I believe Ayn Rand's had a profound impact on the culture already. I think concepts like self-esteem, concepts like capitalism. Capitalism in the 50s and 60s was a dirty word. And the only two people who spoke up for capitalism in a popular way, in a way that affected the culture, are Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman. And by the 1980, capitalism is okay word. By the time Reagan and Thatcher are elected, they can talk about capitalism. That's because of the work Ayn Rand. So I think in many ways, subtle ways, not embracing the entire philosophy, Ayn Rand has already had a substantial impact. There's good evidence to suggest that the draft was eliminated in the United States because of people who associate with Ayn Rand and who brought her ideas in front of Nixon and got rid of the draft, an important pro-liberty moment. So there's a lot of things I think that have happened. We tend to be too pessimistic about the influence. Yeah, in the back.
Thank you for your talk. What was in the core of your talk, I think, was this idea of Renaissance and Enlightenment not being achieved.
Fully manifest, yeah.
Yeah, and being under attack.
Yeah.
I agree with this idea, and I'm questioning the why. And you say that what is under attack is individualism and rationalism. And my personal feeling is that at some point in the process of enlightenment, there was an idea which was really in the core of the writings at that time was res publica. Res publica. No?
No. Translate, somebody?
Okay. In Latin, res is the thing, publica is the common thing.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
So this is the origin of republic.
Yes.
Res publica.
Yes.
in Latin.
Many, one.
Okay?
Yes.
It's the idea of general interest as a goal.
Yes.
And the only non-negotiable thing being the world being governed for the general interest.
Yes.
And at some point, at least in France, we stopped making any distinction between res publica and demos kratos,
Yes.
democracy.
Yeah.
Okay?
Mhm.
Which is absolutely not the same. Res publica was a goal to achieve, a focus point. It requires an analysis. It requires rationalism. Maybe it requires, as a step, to think individualism as well. But once you start confusing res publica and demonstratos, what is it? What is democracy? Democracy.
The rule of the mob.
But it's not an objective, it's a methodology. So as soon as you start confusing the objective, the site, the focus point, and methodology, an idea of methodology, you're losing your way. And then you cannot achieve enlightenment. That's what my not question, it's something I share with you to have your opinion on that. Yeah. And we do not have a system, we have a religion. Because democracy is a religion with its own kind of Bible, which is human rights. So as soon as you are in a religion with a Bible, you're not in analysis, individualism, science, you're in believing.
Yes.
That's why I want to suggest. I think we do not achieve.
So I agree with you. I agree with you, but I would suggest that the points I made are more fundamental. That what you're identifying, which is true, is the consequence of abandoning reason and abandoning individualism. That the consequence of abandoning those things, we abandon the idea of a republic and the meaning of laws and the meaning of the rule of law. And we embraced, because we lost what that means, because I think we lost the concept of individual rights as Locke understood it. We lost that. And maybe France never had it, right? I mean, there's a possibility France never had it completely. And Britain ultimately, Bentham says individual rights are nonsense on stilts, right? Super nonsense. So already in the 19th century, they're chipping away at the idea of individual rights. I think once you lose that, then what's left, right? What's left is whatever the majority wants. And what does the majority want? Whatever they feel. And that's emotion, and that's the loss of individuals. And the whole idea of an inalienable individual rights is the idea that the majority can't take it away from you. And that's what the American Republic is built on, is the idea of the individual sovereignty, and that the government is not there to, you see, and this is partially the understanding of republic, common good. I think there is no such thing as the common good. All there is the good of the individual. What is in the common good, in the proper sense, is to protect the individual. And not to think, when we aggregate individuals, what good do we get? That thinking is a wrong thing. It leads to collectivism and leads ultimately to democracy. So I think even the concept of republic was perverted.
Yeah, that's why as soon as we stop thinking in terms of res publica and republic,
but you see, I think we stopped thinking in terms of individuals and in terms of reason, yes. And then as a consequence, we stopped thinking in terms of republic.
Yes, if you lose the word, you lose the idea. Instead of that word, instead of the idea, you replace it by an idea which is collectivism.
Yes.
Because democracy is nothing else.
Yep.
Then you lose the way, and you cannot achieve this enlightenment process.
I agree with you, and I agree with your characterization of democracy as a religion. I think it certainly is today. I mean, you can say you can criticize almost anything today, but if you criticize democracy, people flip out. They think you're the devil, and it's the worst thing in the world. And they don't realize there's an alternative. They think democracy, authoritarianism. Those are the options, and they don't realize there's a third alternative.
And then do not realize that there are countries in the world or organizations where you are pursuing general interests that are not democracies.
Yes.
Like Singapore or like a family. Yeah. A family is not democracy.
Or a corporation, or many others.
A corporation is not a democracy.
For Iran, what is moral or not? I mean, have we a test, Iran test, to decide what is moral or not?
The moral is that which supports human life, which that is good for human life. The immoral is that which threatens human life. It's that which is bad for human life. And then she says, now it's a scientific question. Let's look at the world and see what things support human life and what things threaten human life. And if you read the Objectivist Ethics and the Virtue of Selfishness, and it's that essay is in French in the book, she then articulates, well, what she thinks is the most important thing that supports human life. And for her, the most important thing that supports human life is to use your mind, is to think that all human values are the creation of human thought, of human reason, everything. And therefore, to her, the number one value, the thing to act, to gain or keep, the thing you want, is reason. And the number one virtue, the action to take, is to be rational. And then she articulates a whole system of what she believes are the principles that are consistent with life, are consistent with success in life, and those which are consistent with failure. Those would be vices, failure is vices, and those who are successful are virtues. So to her, it's a science. What's good for human life? Just like nutrition, right? A doctor in nutrition says, these foods are good for you, these foods are bad for you. And it's hard to tell. And nutritionists disagree. But they agree on the standard. All nutritionists agree that the standard is human health. The difference is that in ethics, we don't agree. Some people think the standard should be other people, and Ayn Rand says the standard should be you, your well-being as a human being. Now, we can have different philosophers disagree about what constitutes human well-being. Aristotle and Ayn Rand would disagree about what constitutes human well-being. But the standard of virtue, the standard of morality, is your well-being, your life, your survival, your ability to flourish as a human being in life. Feel free to jump in.
Well, I have a question. It may sound stupid, but I would like
Sure.
you to...
You won't be the first one.
I would like you to explain the Trump paradox, because he says to be very influenced by Ayn Rand, and she seems to be very well collectivist of the time. So how did you explain this paradox?
Sure. So there's nowhere where Trump claims to be influenced by Ayn Rand. There's not a single place where he claims that. What he said, the only quote I know that he mentions Ayn Rand, he said that Fountainhead was one of his favorite novels. So what? Right? Victor, Les Miserables or 93 is one of my favorite novels. Doesn't mean I agree with Hugo about everything, and doesn't agree, Hugo is a socialist. I'm not a socialist, but I love his novels. So Trump read Fountainhead. Maybe it's because it's about architecture and he's a developer. Who knows what he got out of it? I mean, I have a very low view of Trump. I don't think he's very smart. And I doubt that he finished the Fountainhead, and I really doubt he understood it, philosophically. I think very few people understand the Fountainhead, and I certainly don't think Trump is one of them. Nothing he says, no policy he holds, no belief that he has is consistent with Ayn Rand. He generally wants to deregulate the economy, fine, but he doesn't really. He doesn't know what he wants. He has no philosophy. He has no ideas. He has no beliefs. He has no system. So he absorbs. Somebody said, did a little research project on how he came up with Drain the Swamp. Somebody suggested, draining the swamp sounds good. Trump said, yeah, let me try that. And he went on speech and he said, drain the swamp. And everybody went, yeah, we want to drain the swamp. And he said, okay, that works, so I'm going to keep saying it, right? He is a marketer. He is good at marketing. He has his name on all his hotels. Trump everywhere. He is good at marketing. And that's what he did. He looked at the election and he said, what can I say that'll get people to vote for me? Does Trump really believe trade is bad? I don't know. I don't think he cares. But he knows that at this moment in history, Americans are suspicious, are anxious, are afraid of China and of trade. So he goes after trade. Does he really hate immigrants? His wife is an immigrant. He's married to an immigrant. But everything he does suggests he hates immigrants. No. Again, there's a moment in American history right now. Sad. All these are sad, right? I'm not... Where people hate immigrants. Not just illegal ones. They say they hate illegal immigrants, and they love legal immigrants. But when you push them, they hate immigrants, period. So he capitalized on that, and he used that as a marketing campaign. He saw that before everybody else, that there's a real frustration and anger in America, and that these are ways to... And look, he acted... And if you... Again, I've done some podcasts on this, and where it really analyzed Trump, but he acted like an authoritarian. This is what authoritarians do. Step one. Tell people the world is ending. It's falling apart. They should be really, really afraid. Right? Easy because there's some element of truth, but exaggerated, right? He would say there's carnage in the streets of America. You know what carnage is? Really? I mean, not in my streets. I mean, if you look at crime statistics in America, we live in one of the most peaceful periods in all of American history. Crime is up a little bit, significantly in Chicago. Crime, but that's it. Where I live, for all intents and purposes, there's no crime. I remember in the 70s and 80s going to New York City and being afraid to leave my hotel at night. Today, you can walk in the streets of New York City at 2 a.m., nobody's afraid. And yet, there's carnage in the streets. So we start, and you're losing your jobs. Everybody's losing. The factories are empty all over America. Really? Unemployment is 4%, which is not bad. We produce in America more stuff than ever in history. Double what we produced when the maximum amount of people working production. We have less people working, we produce more. Not surprising, technology. But we're producing more stuff, more real things than ever in American history. But, America's producing nothing. It's all gone to China. It's nonsense. Every single one of these things he said to scare us has an element of truth which he blows up out of proportion. Mm-hmm. So part one, you scare people. Part two, who do you blame? It's not your fault. No, Americans are good people, hard-working people. They believe in God and country and everything's going to be fine. Right? Whose fault is it? It's the other. Fill in the blank. If you're a European authoritarian, it's Jews. Or maybe today it's Muslims. Right? Again, element of truth, but blown out of all proportion. Right? It's Jews. Now, in America, you can't say that, particularly if you want to win an election. So you say it's the Chinese, it's the Mexicans, it's the South Koreans, it's the Germans, it's anybody we trade with. And of course, it's immigrants, because they are the ultimate other. Right? They're closer to being the Jews of Europe, right? Because they're in your country and they look different. Oh my God. Right? So it's immigrants and it's foreigners. And then how do you solve the problem? Right? There's a problem. Life is terrible. It's other people's fault, not Americans. How do you solve the problem? You build a wall. And the ultimate authoritarian, trust me. I ran a business. I know how to fix things. Don't worry. Trust me. That's the playbook of every authoritarian in history. Scare them, find a scapegoat, and then tell them to trust you. And that's what Trump did. Is he an authoritarian? No, because the system in America is robust and won't let him be an authoritarian. But is he in his blood an authoritarian? Absolutely. He says to the Republicans, do away with the filibuster, right? There's a reason there's a filibuster, because the founders didn't like democracy. So they wanted 60 votes. They didn't want 51 for everything. They wanted people to really believe in something, before they passed the law. Right? So, he wants to undo all that because he doesn't care. He's a pragmatist. He wants to win at any cost. So that's my quick analysis of Trump. Yes?
Yes. In your opinions, to what extent does the youth of Ayn Rand have a role in her philosophy, in her economic thoughts? So the fact that she lived in pre-revolutionary Russia, that she lived through the revolution, she came from an upper class family.
Well, middle class, yeah.
Middle class, right.
She wasn't upper class. She was middle class. She's Jewish, owned a pharmacy. That's not upper class. This is a question that's broader than Ayn Rand. What makes us who we are? The environment in which we are raised, option one. Our genes, option two. And then psychologists say it's a mixture of both. And of course, they ignore option three, which I think is the most important, which is the choices we make, the free will that we all have over our own lives, the decision and choices we make. And people ignore that completely. It's as if we're automatons dictated by environment and genes, which is ridiculous in my view. And all you have to do to discover how ridiculous it is look inside yourself introspect a little bit, and you can discover your own will. I think Ayn Rand is mostly the third part, and I think all of us are mostly the third part. I think we are mostly creations of ourselves. I think she was, 150 million Russians, probably more than that, lived under communism. There's only one Ayn Rand. So 150 million were exposed to those ideas. Only one Ayn Rand. Millions and millions and millions lived before Russia with the great 19th century, and none of them are Ayn Rand. So she took that. That was all material for her, no question. And she wouldn't have said and been exactly the same person if not for those, right? Her genes, who made her a genius, her environment that gave her the information, the evidence, but it's her choices, her particular mind that did what it did with it that came out. She would have come up with this philosophy, I think, even if she wasn't in the Soviet Union, but it would have been different. It would have been, the focus and the orientation probably would have been somewhat different. But she's not a product of, nobody is a product of the environment unless you shut yourself down. If you don't think for yourself, then you become a product of other people. She was obviously not that. She was an original thinker. So I think that's part of it. You know, being born at the beginning of the 20th century or the late 19th century gave you a certain spirit that I don't think being born today you could have. A certain optimism, a certain joie de vivre, like say, right? You know, love of life, a certain, you know, life is good. Pre-World War I, there was this attitude in Europe that just, you know, think about the music. Nobody could write Tchaikovsky or Chopin or Rachmaninoff today. It's just not in the psyche. We're cynics. We have punk rock. That's what we love, right? Not me, but, you know, I'm still a romantic. But romantic music is impossible today, right? I was at the d'Orsay Museum today, and nobody can sculpt like that. Not because they don't have the technical skills, but nobody believes in that. Nobody believes in human beings being heroic and beautiful and magnificent like they did in the 19th century. We just don't. We think human beings, scum. So we make them into abstractions, so we can't, God forbid, identify that there's a human being there. No, this was a beautiful, amazing, I mean, particularly for you French. I mean, God, to be in Paris in the 19th century was culturally, I can't think of another era, maybe other than Greece, of cultural vibrancy and optimism. And I mean, you had Hugo and Liszt and Chopin and, you know, sitting at the coffee shop together. I mean, that's just blows your mind, blows my mind anyway. So that's, I mean, to me, so being born during that period matters to your sense of life. I think the biggest tragedy we have today is, you know, I know libertarians don't think these ways, but this is how I think, is the lack of that kind of art, that kind of view of the world, that kind of beauty. Again, we got punk rock. That's ugly. I mean, whatever you say, you might get into it, but it's ugly. It's not beauty and the heroic man and wonderful, great stuff, right? I don't know, punk rock stuck in my mind. Or the abstract art that we have today, which is mostly ugly. And it's meaningless. It doesn't mean a thing. It's postmodernism on canvas, right? No truth, no reality, nothing. Right? That, to me, we're poorer in that regard than anything economically. The economy, yeah, we could still all manage given the socialism that we have. But the lack of great authors, the lack of great novels, the lack of great, you know, maybe you have a few decent movies, but even there, right? Luc Besson is declining dramatically. Question you haven't asked yet.
Finished 30 minutes before. Thank you. It was a wonderful speech. I'm one of the few people here that I'm sure I haven't changed my life, right? But I want to come back to the concept of free will. Because the whole philosophy, the whole system is based on that. If we discover that free will doesn't exist, right? The whole tower falls apart.
Yes.
And you mentioned Sam Harris earlier as well.
Somewhat.
Sam Harris.
Yes.
And I'm sure you know that he's not a huge fan of the concept of free will. He's even an advocate of the illusion of free will. He wrote a whole book about that. And the whole field of neurosciences today is working actively and making progress about the fact that we start to understand the brain better and better. And for now, until now, the evidence seems to suggest that indeed free will is really hard to locate.
Yep.
And so again, I'm a huge fan of Ayn Rand and her philosophy. But if it appears that free will is indeed
then who cares? I agree with, then who cares? Then this discussion is meaningless. Then why am I here? Then it doesn't, nothing I say matters. I mean, to me, the idea we don't have free will is so bizarre. It's so ridiculous. And with all due respect to the scientific information, we're still at the very, very beginning of understanding how the mind works. To make declaratory statements based on research that suggests that they see something happen before you raise your arm, or all this stuff that I read about, is absurd. It's ridiculous. We're at the beginning of the science. There's still 100 years before we fully understand how the mind works, at least. Neuroscientists that I talk to who are familiar with philosophy say that the science has almost nothing to say about free will.
Do you have some books you recommend that would be?
I not anything I could do off the hand. If you send me an email, I could ask around. I'm not an expert, but to me, it's ridiculous. Science will never tell us that we don't have free will. Let me make that clear. Science will never tell us that we don't have free will, any more than science can tell us that reality doesn't exist. That's the level at which free will is at.
Maybe it depends on how you define free will, because it's a difficult concept.
It's a difficult concept. So Ayn Rand defined free will as the ability, it's the choice to focus your mind, to be in focus, to initiate contact with the world, or to not, right? Focus or not to focus. It's not about whether I raise my hand right now or not. It's primarily about the issue of, are you in focus or are you not? Are you activating your mind or are you not activating your mind? And something is activating that mind that is not, what do you call it, billiard ball causality related. And she defined causality different than David Hume defined causality. She defined causality as the thing acting based upon its nature, not the thing acting because something else acted on it. And the nature of consciousness, of human consciousness, is to have free will. It acts based on its nature. And you cannot undo a philosophical concept like that with science. Science ultimately will tell us how it all works once free will is there. But it won't explain. It won't explain away. It cannot explain away free will any different than science can explain away reality. Science will never explain away the existence of this glass. No, we accept that, but because I see it. That's why it can't explain. Because I see it. It's right here. I see it. There's no question. You can see your free will. There's nothing special about your senses that your introspection doesn't have. Quantum physics has not made me change my mind about this glass. No science that you come up with will make me question the existence, because I see it, of my free will. I know that I'm choosing to be here in the sense of to be engaged. Right? And I know that. And that's knowledge, the same kind of knowledge that seeing this glass is. It's the same philosophically, epistemologically. Those are the same types of knowledge. The problem with science, the scientists today, not the problem with science, is that they have a corrupt philosophical understanding of these concepts, and therefore undermining, the science, the philosophy is undermining the real science. What they're discovering is not correlated with what they think they're discovering philosophically. It's the same problem I think they have with quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is an observable reality. What's going on there is real, but how you interpret it, that's a question of philosophy of science. How you interpret the results, the neurological results, is a question for philosophy of science. And the question of whether you have free will is not a scientific question. It is a observational question. It is an axiomatic question. It's something you observe directly, just like this glass. It's the best I can do. Not my expertise. I'm not in epistemology, but that's I think that's what Ayn Rand would say. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Yaron Brook, and thank you, Alain Laurent, for your impressive
Tell them
speeches.
about Saturday's
yes, several things. First of all, I know that the Ayn Rand Institute thanks a lot the ALEPS.
Absolutely.
Olivier Mérès working for the ALEPS.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you again for hosting this event. Alors,
And thank Christophe for helping organize this.
thank you. Malheureusement, on a assez peu de bouquins, donc en fait, je vous demande de ne pas vous servir, de les commander directement. Alors, vous avez notamment les ouvrages de Yaron Brook qui sont recensés sur une petite fiche qui est là-bas. En revanche, pour les étudiants, notamment les programmes du Heinemann Institute, c'est des prospectus à récupérer. En revanche, je vous engage à prendre ces petits livrets. Pour le coup, on en a suffisamment et on en aura encore suffisamment pour samedi. Et pour le mouvement Students for Liberty, on a ces deux bouquins qui sont traduits en français et c'est un peu la fin qu'on a. Donc si vous ne les avez pas encore, n'hésitez pas à les prendre. Pour pas être long, j'enverrai un mail à tous ceux qui sont venus ici, puisque j'ai leur adresse demain, pour parler de l'événement qui a lieu samedi près de Bastille, de 10h à 17h. Yaron Brook parlera à nouveau à 14h. Mathilde, qui est ici, parlera aussi du féminisme et du libéralisme. Et puis on aura Nathalie Janson sur les banques centrales. Et le matin, on aura 3 interventions sur tout ce qui touche autour des politiques de lutte, enfin, politique contre les drogues, tout ce qui touche à la code du travail. Et puis on a et le protectionnisme. Voilà. Merci encore à tous. Et puis à très bientôt. Et vive la liberté.
Il y avait une association, un cercle, quelque chose, Ayn Rand, et ici à Paris.
Non,
pas
vraiment.
Rien de similaire.
Non.
Pas forcément Ayn Rand.
Non. Enfin, nous on a Students for Liberty, on a plein de.
Qu'est-ce que vous faites? J'aimerais que vous me renseigniez sur.
Oui, je vais faire ça. Vous voulez les regarder? Vous voulez les regarder ou pas? Oh, vous voulez. Ah oui, j'ai deux ouvrages de Yaron Brook.
Are we going to dinner now?
Oui. Sorry.
Do we have a dinner arranged?
Yes, we have.
Okay, we are late.
We are late, but I know just told them we were late because she said that's fine. I think I just perhaps we can go. Do you know where is the address? It's very
Now, in my view, Ayn Rand gives us the tools to finish the Enlightenment project. I think the Enlightenment was weakened. You could argue failed, but I don't think it failed because we still live in an enlightened world, even if it's in decline. Ayn Rand gives us the tools to fully understand and justify reason. So I think that Locke and the rest of the French Enlightenment and the Scottish Enlightenment, while incredible people and it created enormous value, they didn't get to the heart, philosophical heart of reason. They couldn't completely articulate the case for reason. They didn't have a solid theory of concept and concept formation and how we understand the world and how we abstract and what it means to abstract and how we induce, and they didn't have a complete theory of inducing knowledge from reality. Ayn Rand does. At least she has the beginnings of one. She calls it Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, because she still realized there was still a lot of work to do, but at least she gives us the tools to develop epistemology fully for full, complete defense of reason, which is what I think is the most important thing that needs to happen today. As the attack on the rejection of, as is the whole string of German philosophers that I mentioned, of which communism and Nazism, in my view, is the logical outcome, the necessary outcome. Collectivism always leads to destruction and death. Now, we survived the Nazis, we survived the fascists, and ultimately we survived the communists. But we're badly wounded. We've lost, well, we know what we reject. We reject this particular form of collectivism. And we reject murder and slaughter for the most part. What are we for? Nobody in the West today knows. We live a life, for the most part, based on reason and individualism. We love technology. We love science still. We have respect for technology and science. We try to be happy. If you go to any bookstore, I assume in France it's the same. You have aisles of self-help book. We all want to be better. We all want to achieve happiness somehow. But we can't name it. and indeed remnants of the anti-Enlightenment mentality, both from German philosophy but also from Christianity, are still strongly embedded in this culture. It's still true that we hold as moral, not the pursuit of happiness, not the pursuit of individual fulfillment, flourishing, Aristotelian eudaimonia, or Ayn Rand, egoism. What we value still morally, what we say we value, we might not live this way, is altruism, sacrifice, giving up for other people. Other people are more important than myself. And altruism, I don't mean altruism as being nice to people and opening a door and being polite. Egoists do that. I'm talking about altruism as viewing the purpose of your life to serve others. Mother Teresa. That's my image. She hated her life. She did it out of duty. She did it because she believed it was moral and just. That sense, which we all have deep inside, if we grew up in this world, that was brought to us, I think, primarily by Christianity, but also by a great another French philosopher, Auguste Comte, who encourages us to eliminate self for the sake of others. These ideas are deep inside of us, and we struggle with the ideas of the Enlightenment and these anti-Enlightenment ideas, these ideas that undercut Enlightenment thinking. And the idea that the group is what matters. And of course the ultimate attack on reason. Individuals don't matter. Individuals don't think. Truth is revealed. It's revealed to somehow to this collective consciousness which is the proletarian, or the collective consciousness that is the Aryan race. Now, since there isn't a collective consciousness, we know that, but don't tell anybody, right? We need a leader to be able to, a philosopher king, to be able to commune with this collective consciousness and tell us what it thinks. And that's how you get authoritarianism. But authoritarians always say, I'm not doing it for me, I'm doing it for you. I'm just discovering the truth and communicating to you. And it turns out that we have to sacrifice a huge number of people in the world in order to satisfy the will of the proletarian or the will of the Aryan race. 20 million, 100 million, 200 million. The sky's the limit when it comes to sacrificing individuals. But that is the rejection of the Enlightenment. Communism and Nazism are the rejection of the ideas of individualism and of reason. They are the rejection of the ideas of Western civilization. They are not bad parts of Western civilization. They are the enemy of Western civilization. Nazism and communism are not part of. The reason is again intensifying in the West. She gives us an understanding of individualism that never existed. Again, because I think even the Enlightenment figures, particularly the Scottish Enlightenment, the French less so, were so imbued with Christianity that they couldn't give up on Christian morality. They couldn't give up on sacrifice as an ideal. They couldn't give up the idea that sacrifice was noble, that living for others was good, that the meek shall inherit the earth. They couldn't quite, even the founding fathers, couldn't quite give all that up. You know, Thomas Jefferson took the Bible, the New Testament, and cut it up, and he threw away all the parts he didn't like, which is all the mysticism he didn't like. So he was a man of reason. But he kept the Sermon on the Mount, because he viewed that as a moral philosophy. That is a really, really bad moral philosophy, if you take it seriously. And it's a moral philosophy that imbues the West today. And it's a moral philosophy that needs to be rejected. And there is no moral thinker that presents an alternative to the Sermon on the Mount other than Ayn Rand. I mean, Aristotle and then Ayn Rand. Spinoza maybe a little bit in between. But there is no alternative.